Hi YouTube family, my name is Mageorgiba. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. If you're a returning subscriber, welcome back. I hope everyone's had a good week so far and you're not letting anyone dim your light. So last week we talked about value and I made mention of the possibility that we could be people pleasers. You have to believe that there is something so valuable inside of you that anyone who rejects you has robbed themselves. As a matter of fact, I submit to you to consider that if everyone likes you, chances are you are a people pleaser. But that's a discussion for another day. Today we will be talking about 3 signs that we could actually be people pleasers. Alright, so I've written down 2 definitions of who a people pleaser is. The first one is from the urbandictionary.com and it says, a people pleaser is a person who pleases people just for the sake of keeping them as a friend or making them happy. The second definition is from Merriam-Webster and it says, a people pleaser is a person who has an emotional need to please others, often at the expense of his or her own needs or desires. Okay, so sign number 1 that we could be people pleasers, eye service. Okay, Urban Dictionary defines eye service as working only when the boss is around. Boss in quote. Now, let's take the boss to mean anyone in higher authority over us. So this could actually be someone with respect and would want to impress. So maybe an actual boss, a team leader, or a parent, or a teacher, or an auntie, or an uncle, or maybe even just a friend that we hold in high regard. So if we find ourselves only doing certain things which we ought to do normally when any of these people are around, or whenever we know they would be coming, that right there is a sign that there is a possibility that we could be people pleasers. Okay, Bible says in Colossians chapter 3 verse 23 that we should work willingly at whatever we do, as though we were working for the Lord rather than for people. Also in Ephesians chapter 6 verse 7, we are told to serve wholeheartedly as if we were serving the Lord and not people. All right, so sign number 2 that we could be people pleasers. You are conforming to the patterns of the world. Conforming, not confirming. English. The Cambridge Dictionary defines conform as to behave according to the usual standards of behavior that are expected by a group or society. All right, we're going to take a look at Daniel chapter 3. It's a bit of a read, so you could get your Bible and go along with me, or you could just listen while I read. All right, so King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to the high officials, officers, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted out, "People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshipped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king! You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, don't know if I pronounced that right, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is this true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "It's getting interesting now. O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship that gold statue you have set up." Can we just take a minute to just think, like, the amount of faith Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had in God, that even in the face of death, they rather keep leaning on his promises, that he's a good father, that he's able, that he's the one through God, he's the Alpha and Omega. They rather keep leaning on all those things than give in to the pressures and the fears of their current situations. Let's reflect on that a bit. All right, let's go on. So now, Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. Man, I don't want to see that. Don't even want to know what it looks like. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Wow. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. But suddenly, somebody say suddenly. Suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men unbound walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god." Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make this decree: if any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. Now you may not be bowing down to a 90 feet tall and a 9 feet wide gold statue, but that's only symbolic of an idol. What could you be bowing down to? Could it be getting wealth by any means necessary? Or lowering your biblical standards of what a godly relationship should look like because of the pressure from family, friends, the society as a whole? We need to grow in our relationship with God to the point where we can say, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if we are thrown into a blazing furnace, if I don't become wealthy according to how the world defines wealth, if I have to stand alone for what I believe is right in the sight of God, the God whom we serve is able to save us. But even if he doesn't, I will not go outside of God's will to please the world. Romans chapter 12 verse 1 to 2 says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." Well, we can be transformed by the renewing of our minds when we spend time in fellowship with other believers, when we spend time with God alone, praising, worshiping, studying the Bible, and praying. Okay, so last but not least, sign number 3 that we are people pleasers is you constantly need to be validated by others to feel good. This means you almost always need others to tell you things like, "Oh, you're doing great. You look good today. You are so important to me," and so on. Which kind of puts you on a high, which would eventually wear off. And you will need people to once again validate you, to make you feel good about yourself. And it's kind of like a cycle. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to accept compliments from people, but what I'm saying is if your worth is determined by how many compliments you get or by how many likes you get on a social media post, then when you don't get validation from those areas, what would you do? Wouldn't it be a better way to know that our true worth comes from God? His unfailing love for us made him send his only Son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross of Calvary for us. There is a saying I came up with sometime last year, and it goes like this: I'd rather be crazy to the world and please God than to be sane and miss heaven. I'll say it again. I'd rather be crazy to the world and please God than be sane and miss heaven. Okay, fam, so that's all for today. Like this video if you benefited from anything I said, and share this video with any and everybody you think needs to hear this, because it's quite an important topic in our society that we live in. Also, leave comments in the comment section down below letting me know what other possible signs you think could indicate that we could be people pleasers. Remember to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and turn on the bell notification below so that you get notified whenever I post a new video. Bye!